Hello and welcome to this training session pertaining to screen designing in Fuuz. Fuuz is a manufacturing platform. It's purposely built for our customers to be able to extend and augment their own solutions or those solutions that we or a partner has created for you. Today I'm going to talk about basics of screen design and the screen designer and various options, as well as what screens are. Our agenda is to talk about the screen list, what are screens, how are screens generated, show a system generated flow, which is a one button click, and then we'll show you how to access the screen designer application within the platform. So my name is Craig Scott, and I'll be walking you through this session today. So thanks for joining, and we'll get started. First thing we're going to do is get logged into our build environment. As you'll see in the upper left-hand corner, I'm going to build.mfgx.fuuz.app. So you should have your own build environment for your own enterprise. You go ahead and get logged in here. And this is going to take me to whatever the last screen was that I, as a user, was actively viewing or utilizing. So you'll see here that I'm on my maintenance dispatch screen. So a screen in Fuuz can be many different things. It could be a dashboard, it could be a table, a report, an operator control panel, supplier portal. It could be just about anything. It's really anything that you want to use to present information to your end users. I'm going to talk about the different components of the screens in another session. In this session, we're going to focus on the basics of screens and screen design. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the screens list itself. You can access the screens list, as I did, through the search in the top right, entering screens. You can also click on the avatar in the top right, go to System, and then select Screens from the submenu over on the left. Or lastly, you can use the full system menu to navigate through as the breadcrumbs show you up here at the top. The Screens page is a listing of all of the screens that have been created or deployed or installed within a particular tenant. Right now, I'm in the MES2 tenant, so I have a list of all of the screens that are available to my end users or me as an admin in this particular tenant. You'll notice that there are 493 screens in the table above. Each screen has a name, which typically represents its function. So you'll see that some are named table, some are a form. Others may be things like control panel or dashboard, as you'll notice. Each screen is either active or inactive, meaning it's currently in use or not. There is a description for each screen, which is user definable. There's a current version, which ties back to the actual design of the screen. There's also a current deployment of the screen as well. So I may be on version 12, but in this particular example, there's only been 2 deployments of the screen, which means I've been doing some development on that screen. And once I reached the change 11, I decided to deploy it so that I could give it to a user for testing. You can see the deployed date and time, who it was deployed by, routes that are associated with that particular screen, and then the versions that are associated as well. So one reason why I may not see versions 1 through 10 listed here is that this screen came from an app that was built in another tenant, and I installed the screen here. So since installation into this particular tenant, we've only made a couple of revisions to it. Both of those revisions have been deployed. All of that information is readily available here. You'll see that if I click on this, I can edit the description, even the screen name. I can also bounce back and go to the routes that are linked to the screen. So you can have more than one path to get to the same screen if you want for various reasons. That screen is going to be linked to a module, which is customer definable, and then determine whether or not you want that screen to be menu accessible or not, and if it would be part of a submenu. Some of these details we talked about in an earlier video that was recorded as part of the Fuuz 101 admin training. So you can follow up there if you'd like to learn more about the concept of routes and screens. Let's take a look at the route. And here we can see that there is a path to this particular screen. This happens to be a form, and I can tell because the path ends with the ID of the record that we're going to be viewing. So this path could be modified. I can also change the module. I can flip this to be menu accessible, which is typically not a great idea for a form. Because typically for forms you want to access them from a table first, right? So the user would typically navigate to a table or a report version of the screen, search and filter down to a specific item that they want to view or edit. They would select that item, which would then take them to the form. You can also add a submenu option here. The straight path is typically defined by the module and the module group, and then you can further refine that by using the submenu. You can delete the route, which would make it impossible for anyone to get to the screen. If you delete the route, you can always reinstitute the route. That's not a big deal. We can see the different versions for the screen, so as you're making changes or edits to your screen design, each of those versions are saved, and you can resort back to them. You can even copy a version to create a new and edit. You can go straight into the designer from here, and you can deploy from here. So many of the development lifecycle options that you would have within the screen designer itself are also available right within the screens table. Looking at the deployments tab, you can see that we have the 2 deployments, each with their own unique ID. You can edit and delete deployments. You can roll deployments back if you make an error. So there's lots of functionality around that. Now, resorting back to our agenda, we've shown you how to access the screen list. We've talked a bit about what screens are. Now we're going to look at how screens are generated. So the first method we're going to talk about in how screens are generated is first for you to understand that most everything within Fuuz, being an application that is going to start schema first. So rather than going in and trying to build an app by starting with the screen, you typically want to start with the data that's going to support that particular screen or application. That would be done using the schema designer, so you can go visit the training for more information on that. What I'm showing here is the data models screen, which is a report or a list of all of the individual data models that have been created within this particular tenant. You can see here there are 233 data models. If we pick a fairly common data model, let's look at customer, for example. So there's a data model in this tenant called customer, which is going to house various information or details about a customer that we might do business with. By selecting that row, you'll see we have a number of options. We can create new models from here. We can update or edit the definition of this model and description. We could delete a model. We can go into the schema designer. So by selecting this model and hitting design, that would launch the schema designer for us. Lastly, what we're really looking at here is the system generated screen flow. This action button is linked to a flow that you can install into your tenant, and that flow will take the data model definition and it will generate the table and the form as well as the nested forms for the child objects. So if we say take customer and generate a table and I want to deploy the new version once it's created, and I hit accept, that will trigger a data flow to go and create the entire screen, table, and subtables. I would then turn around and say generate the form for that same object and do the same. By doing that, what you're ending up with is a system-generated screen, as we call it. Let's go see what that would look like. Here is the customer screen that would be generated by that flow automatically for me, just by clicking the button. What that flow will do is it will put in place all of the filters, CRUD actions, as well as the table with the appropriate columns. You're also going to get the option at this point to modify the table, add and take columns away if you want, add or update the default filters, even setting default values in the filters, and then saving these views if you want to make alterations. That's the easiest and quickest way to get screens up and running so that your end users can literally start adding and editing data within minutes. Now let's take a look at the form. If I select one of these customer codes, it's going to expose the form that was also generated by the system. It places the fields here on the left with the history information on the right for me automatically. And notice across the top, we get all of these subforms because customers have customer addresses, who also have contacts, customer products, and sales orders. There's some additional filtering and wiring up that we would have to do in some cases, not all. But this gives you a general idea of how a system-generated screen would come to be. Now, system-generated screens, if I go into this icon right here, which is in the middle, this is the screen design icon that's accessible by system admins. System-generated screens are all defined by a single JSON object. You can modify this object so you can essentially make the screen be, look, and feel however you'd like if you're comfortable using this method of editing. Now let's take a look really quickly at the data flow itself. So there is a system data flow which you can install. It's a Fuuz package that you can go and install into your tenant that will generate those screens for you. Let's see if we can find that flow so we can show you what we're talking about. So down here you'll see that there's a screen generator as well as screen generation, column, filter, section, create. So these are standard system flows that are utilized by that action button that we clicked on the data model screen that created all of that user interface for us that was usable right off the bat. You can install this package if you intend on using system-generated screens. Please note that if you don't install the screen generator package and you click the action button from the data model screen, you will get an error. That error simply states that you have not yet installed the screen generator package. You don't have to install the screen generator package in order to create screens, however. The newer method to that would be to use the drag and drop screen designer, which is located here. You can access the screen designer by using the search at the top and type in screen designer, or follow the breadcrumbs. If you're a developer, you might also want to add it to your role-based menu on the left-hand side. So we're not going to get into all the details here with the screen designer, but we'll cover a few basics, just so we get everybody on the same page. We can open a screen to modify it, so that would allow us to open any screen from the screens list that we showed you earlier. Or we can start a new screen by selecting whether we want a form, a table, or just start blank. Maybe we want to build a control panel from scratch or a material handling app. Let's start with a table. What this application will do is it will ask me to select a data model. So let's use the same data model of customer. Now it's presenting me with a list of all of the fields that are available within that customer data model. And if I hit this button, it's going to generate the screen for me. So as you can see, in a matter of seconds, it generated all of the filters, action buttons, and table columns. I can save this. I can give it a version number, flag it as active, and add a description. This will save the screen into the screens list for me. At that point, I can start to make modifications, and when I'm ready, finally, I can deploy it. There's also an option here to turn screens into a widget, which becomes then a baseline template that you can pull into other screens that you see necessary. So those might be standard components or features that you see your users using across many different applications, so you don't have to rebuild them every time. So we're going to get into much more detail with the screen designer here in subsequent videos. And that now completes this course.